The night was cold and dark over the sea. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the water looked like a giant black mirror. Far below that darkness, a long line of Allied ships moved slowly through the waves. Their lights were off. Their engines were quiet. Everyone on board knew that danger was close. Inside a small radar station on the coastline, a young operator sat in front of a glowing green screen. His room was tiny, cold, and filled with the buzzing sound of old machines. The screen in front of him showed nothing but lines and dots, blinking softly like tired stars. His name was Thomas Hale, and he had only been on duty for 2 hours, but already he felt nervous. Something in the air felt wrong. The radio crackled. "Status check. Any movement?" Thomas swallowed. "Nothing yet," he answered. "Screen is strange tonight. Lots of noise." He wasn't lying. The radar was acting weird. The signals were jumping. The lines were shaking. The echoes looked messy. It was harder than usual to see anything at all. Most operators would have blamed the weather, or the old tubes inside the radar, or the sea mist that sometimes made the whole system fuzzy. But Thomas kept watching. His tired eyes followed every flicker. Out on the water, the convoy kept moving. Soldiers stood on decks, gripping cold metal rails. Some looked up at the sky, trying to see through the darkness. Some prayed. Some held photos of their families. Everyone knew German night fighters liked attacking when the world was asleep. Miles away, hidden behind the clouds, German pilots were flying low and quiet, hunting for the convoy. Their engines were soft, their radios whispered, their planes were painted black so the night would hide them. They had used this trick many times before. Surprise, attack, disappear. Simple. Deadly. Inside the radar room, Thomas rubbed his eyes. He leaned closer to the screen. And then he saw it. At first it looked like a mistake. Just a tiny bump of light on the edge of the radar circle. It flickered once, then again. It was faint, almost invisible under the noise. But it moved. Signals didn't move like that unless something was flying. Thomas's heart jumped. He checked the machine again. He tapped the side. The bump of light was still there, growing brighter, moving faster. "Wait," he whispered. "That's not weather." He adjusted the knob on the side, a little twist he wasn't supposed to use. The screen cleared just enough for him to see it. Multiple bright spots, growing, closing in. His stomach tightened. He grabbed the radio. "Control, this is station E7, he said quickly. "I have contacts, multiple, fast, heading straight for the convoy." There was silence. Then a voice snapped. "Impossible. No one else sees anything." "I see them," Thomas said. "They're coming." Alarms began to ring. Sirens howled through the base. Ships turned. Anti-air crews ran to their guns. Pilots sprinted to their planes. And somewhere above the clouds, the German night fighters suddenly lost their element of surprise. According to the manuals, Thomas's radar should not have picked them up. According to every test, the signal should have been too weak. According to everyone else on duty that night, there was nothing there. But Thomas had seen them first, and no one knew why. Not yet, but they soon would. Before the night of the attack, before the alarms and the danger, Thomas Hale was just a quiet boy from a small town. He grew up in a little house near a railroad track where trains rattled the windows every morning. His father fixed radios for neighbors, and Thomas spent most of his childhood sitting beside him, holding wires, twisting knobs, or handing him screwdrivers. He was not fast in school. Math was hard. History felt boring. But when he looked at wires or listened to static, something inside him clicked. When he was 10, he fixed his sister's broken record player. When he was 12, he repaired a neighbor's old radio that even grown men said was impossible to fix. Thomas didn't brag. He didn't even smile much. He just liked the quiet hum of electricity. He liked how signals moved through wires like tiny secret rivers. When the war started, posters went up everywhere asking for soldiers, pilots, nurses, and radio workers. Thomas wasn't strong enough to be a soldier. He wasn't fast enough to be a pilot. But the moment he saw the poster that said, "Radar operators needed, train fast, serve quickly," he knew where he belonged. His mother cried when he left. His father hugged him hard and said, "Son, do your best. Even small hands can help win big wars." Training camp was nothing like home. Loud, busy, crowded. Instructors barked orders every minute. Radar school felt even harder. The machines were big, noisy, and confusing. The screens glowed bright green, filled with lines and dots that moved too fast. The teachers talked about frequencies, waveforms, signal drift, and vacuum tubes. Some of the students understood right away. Some had college degrees or strong math skills, but not Thomas. The first week, he failed 3 tests. The second week, his teacher shook his head and said, "Hale, you're trying, but this job isn't for daydreamers." Thomas wasn't daydreaming. He was listening to the soft buzz inside each machine, to the way the tubes hummed when they heated up. He could hear patterns others ignored. He could sense when something inside the radar was off, even before the screen showed it. One night during training, Thomas stayed late after everyone else left. He sat alone in the dark classroom, staring at the glowing radar screen. The teacher found him there and frowned. "Hale, what on earth are you doing?" Thomas pointed at a small blip on the screen. "That," he said quietly. "It shouldn't be moving like that. Something's wrong with the tuning coil." The teacher checked the machine. The tuning coil was loose. He stared at Thomas for a long moment. "You saw that?" he asked. Thomas nodded. From that day, people looked at him differently. He wasn't the smartest. He didn't follow every rule. But he had something rare. He could feel the radar. When training ended, other students were sent to busy city stations or big bases. But Thomas was sent to a lonely radar post on the coast, small, quiet, far from attention. No one thought he'd ever do anything important. Not the officers, not the instructors, not even Thomas himself. But war has a way of finding the people it needs most, and soon the quiet kid with the sharp ears would face a moment that would change everything. Thomas's radar station sat on top of a windy cliff. The building was small, gray, and always cold. The ocean below made a deep rushing sound, like a giant breathing in the dark. Inside the station, old machines hummed day and night. The walls shook whenever the wind pushed too hard. Most people didn't like working there, but Thomas didn't mind. He liked the quiet. He liked the sound of the radar tubes warming up. He liked the green screen glowing in front of him like a tiny piece of magic. But after a few weeks, he started noticing something strange. At night, the radar began acting different. Sometimes the signal lines would wiggle. Sometimes the echoes would blur. Sometimes whole sections of the screen would fade, like someone erased part of the sky. At first, Thomas blamed himself. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he pressed the wrong button. Maybe he turned a knob too far. But the problem kept happening, even when someone else watched the screen. Then he realized the truth. The radar wasn't broken. It just wasn't good enough for the night. Moisture from the ocean made the signal weak. Cold air made the tubes shake. Storm clouds caused strange reflections, and sometimes German planes used radio tricks to jam Allied radars. But when Thomas tried to explain this, no one listened. One morning, he walked into the command office and saluted. "Sir, the night readings aren't stable. I think we're losing targets." The officer didn't even look up from his clipboard. "Hale, the radar is fine. Stick to your instructions." "But, sir, the interference—" "Follow the manual," the officer said sharply. "Nothing more, nothing less." Thomas walked out feeling small. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He just didn't want the radar to fail when it mattered most. The next night, the problem happened again. A bright echo suddenly broke into 4 blurry dots. Another echo jumped around like it was scared. Then a whole section of the screen flickered and vanished. Thomas leaned closer. He turned the gain knob. He checked the power meter. Everything looked normal, but nothing was normal. During a short break, Thomas went outside to clear his head. The moon was hidden behind dark clouds. The wind was strong. The air felt heavy with salt. He looked at the sky and felt a strange worry grow inside him. If the radar can't see clearly, how will we warn anyone? The next day he tried again. "Sir, with respect, we could improve the signal by adjusting the—" "No changes," the supervisor snapped. "The machine works the way it was designed. Don't play hero, Hale." Hero. The word echoed in Thomas's mind. He didn't feel like one. He didn't want to be one. He just wanted the radar to work. That night, while the world slept, the screen flickered again. Thomas watched the dots scatter like scared fireflies. He felt his heart sink. Something was wrong. Very wrong, and if no one else would fix it. Then he knew he had to try, even if he wasn't allowed to. Thomas sat in the radar room long after the other operators left. The lights were dim. The machines buzzed softly. The green radar screen glowed like a lonely moon in the dark. He stared at it, thinking about everything the officers had told him. Don't change anything. Follow the manual. Don't think you know better. He wasn't trying to be better. He was just trying to help. Each night the radar failed in the same way. The lines shook. The echoes blurred. Some dots disappeared completely. He knew this wasn't normal. He also knew that if a German night fighter came during one of those moments, the convoy would be helpless. Thomas looked around the empty room. No officers, no cameras, no one checking on him. It was just him and the machine. And sometimes that was enough. He opened the side panel of the radar set. It made a soft click. Inside were shiny tubes, wires, and metal coils. They looked confusing to most people, but to Thomas, they looked like the inside of a living creature, something he understood. He knew he wasn't supposed to touch anything. He knew messing with the machine could get him kicked out, but he also knew the radar wasn't working as it should. He took a deep breath and began. First, he checked the tuning coil. He noticed it wasn't tight. When cold night air hit it, even a tiny shake could ruin the signal. So he tightened it carefully. Then he tested the gain knob. During storms, the gain made the screen too bright or too dark. So he adjusted it, not according to the manual, but based on what his ears and eyes told him. But the biggest change came when he saw a loose grounding wire. It wasn't broken, but it wasn't steady either. Every time the building shook from strong wind, the wire wiggled, sending tiny shocks of noise into the signal. Thomas thought for a moment. He pulled a small piece of copper wire from his toolbox. It was old, slightly bent, and not regulation equipment. But it was strong. Quietly, quickly, he attached the copper wire to reinforce the ground connection. The fix didn't look neat. It didn't look perfect. It wasn't even the way the radar manual said to do it. But the moment he powered the radar back on, he saw something he hadn't seen in weeks. A clear echo, sharp, bright, steady. Thomas's eyes widened. He changed the screen range. The echo stayed clear. He adjusted the gain. The signal didn't blur. He tapped the panel softly. The screen didn't flicker. For the first time, the radar looked right. Just then, another operator walked in. He saw the open panel. He saw the copper wire. "Hale, what did you do?" he whispered. Thomas froze. I just tightened a few things." The operator's eyes widened. "If the officers find out, you're done." Thomas nodded. He knew that. He closed the panel, wiped the dust from his hands, and sat back in his chair. "Please," he whispered to the machine, "just hold together." Because deep down he knew this fix, this small, secret fix, might be the only thing standing between safety and disaster, and no one else would ever know. Not yet. For the next few days, Thomas kept his secret fix hidden. He worked his normal shifts. He followed orders. He wrote reports like everyone else. But every night when the radar screen glowed, he watched it closely, almost holding his breath. And something amazing kept happening. The screen stayed steady. The lines didn't jump. The echoes didn't blur. Even during bad weather or strong winds, the radar stayed clear and sharp. Thomas didn't smile often, but every time he saw those perfect echoes, a tiny smile crept across his face. He wasn't supposed to change anything, but the fix had worked. It worked better than he dreamed. He didn't brag. He didn't tell the officers. He didn't even write it in his logbook. He knew the fix didn't look official. It didn't look neat. It didn't look proper, but it worked. Then one morning something unexpected happened. A team of engineers visited the radar station. They wore clean uniforms, shiny shoes, and carried clipboards full of papers. They were sent to check radar stations across the coast because other operators had been reporting problems during the night. The chief engineer walked straight to Thomas's machine. "This is Station E7's radar?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Thomas said politely. The engineer tapped the glass screen, studying it. "Funny. This one has the best log data so far. Hardly any night failures." Thomas stayed quiet. His hands felt cold. The engineer nodded at two assistants. "Open the side panel." Thomas's heart dropped. The assistants unscrewed the metal plate. They pulled it off slowly. The inside of the machine was revealed. There it was. His secret fix. The crooked copper wire. The tightened coil. The slightly off-center adjustments. The engineer squinted. "Who made this change?" No one spoke. One assistant whispered, "Sir, this isn't regulation wiring." The chief engineer leaned closer. "Then why," he said slowly, "is this the only radar on the coast that isn't failing at night?" The room went silent. "Run a stress test," the engineer ordered. They powered the machine up. They shook the table. They sprayed mist to mimic ocean moisture. They lowered the room temperature. They increased vibration strength. The dots on the screen stayed clear. "Again," the engineer said. They tested it all over, and again, and again. The machine refused to break. One engineer scratched his head. "Sir, I think this weird setup is working." The chief engineer frowned. "Working? It's outperforming every other radar we've tested." Another assistant looked confused. "But sir, the wire looks messy." The chief engineer sighed. "I don't care how it looks. I care that it holds." He wrote something on his clipboard. "Station E7. Superior nighttime stability. Unusual internal configuration. Investigate further." Thomas swallowed hard. He waited for someone to yell at him, to accuse him, to blame him. But no one did. The engineers left the station shaking their heads, whispering to each other. "Whoever did that," one said, "knew something we didn't." Thomas exhaled slowly. His hands stopped shaking. He hadn't been caught. More than that, he had been noticed, not by name, not by rank. Not officially, but someone finally saw that something different was happening in his machine. Something important, something that might change everything. The night of the attack began like any other, cold, quiet, black as ink. The sea below looked calm, but everyone knew that danger loved the dark. A long Allied convoy was moving across the water, dozens of ships carrying soldiers, fuel, food, and supplies. If the Germans stopped this convoy, many brave men on the front lines would go hungry, unprotected, or worse. Inside the small radar room on the cliff, Thomas sat in front of the glowing screen. The green light painted his face as he watched the circles move slowly. The machine hummed like it always did. Most people hated that sound. But to Thomas it felt like a steady heartbeat in the darkness. He checked the settings again. Gain, range, rotation speed. Everything looked normal. Everything felt normal. But Thomas didn't trust normal. Not anymore. Out at sea, the convoy pushed forward. Sailors shivered in the cold wind. Officers scanned the sky with binoculars even though they could barely see their own hands. Everyone knew German night fighters liked to attack when the moon was hidden. Miles away, high in the thick clouds, German planes began to move, black-painted, silent, deadly. They flew in tight formation, their pilots trained to strike fast. The German leader whispered into his radio, "Stay low, stay dark, they will never see us coming." And normally he would be right. Most radar stations were struggling again. Their screens fuzzed with static. Their echoes blinked out like weak candles. Operators kept reporting, "Nothing on the screen. Signal too messy. We might be blind." But in Station E7, Thomas leaned closer to his radar. He noticed something small, a tiny flicker on the far edge of the circle. It was faint, almost too faint to see. But it moved. Thomas's heart sped up. He adjusted the knob, his secret knob, the one the manual said never to touch. The screen sharpened. The flicker became a brighter dot. Then it became 2, then 5. More dots appeared, fast, low. Heading straight for the convoy, Thomas grabbed the radio. "Control, this is E7. I have multiple contacts approaching fast." The radio crackled. "E7. No other station sees anything. Are you sure?" Thomas stared at the screen. "I'm sure. They're coming right now." Suddenly, alarms blasted through the base. Sirens wailed, lights flashed. Soldiers ran from their bunks. Out at sea, ships received the warning and changed course. Searchlights stayed dark so the enemy wouldn't see them. Anti-air guns were manned. Pilots in nearby airfields sprinted toward their planes. In the sky, the German leader looked down through the clouds. He expected to see slow, unaware ships. Instead, he saw chaos. The convoy was turning. Fighters were climbing toward them. The trap was ruined. The Germans tried to attack anyway, but it was too late. The Allies were ready. The night fighters were pushed back by anti-air fire and chased away by Allied planes. The convoy lived. Hundreds of sailors lived. Because one radar had seen the danger first. Because one wrong fix worked when nothing else did. Because one quiet operator noticed what others missed. When the attack ended, Thomas sat alone in the radar room. His hands shook softly. He stared at the glowing screen, still bright and clear, still holding strong. No one knew yet. No one knew why his radar worked when the others failed. But they would soon, and the world would almost forget the truth. The morning after the night fighter attack, the whole base buzzed with excitement. Officers hurried down hallways. Messengers ran from room to room. Radios crackled with fast voices. Everyone kept saying the same thing. The convoy survived. They saw the enemy early. Someone caught the attack before anyone else. But no one knew who. Not yet. Thomas sat at his radar desk, quietly checking the machine. He didn't brag. He didn't look for attention. He didn't even tell the other operators what had happened. He just felt relieved. Relieved that his fix had worked. Relieved that the convoy was safe. Relieved that no lives were lost. Later that day, a jeep rolled up outside the radar station. 3 engineers and 1 officer stepped out. They carried clipboards and notebooks. Their shoes were shiny and their uniforms were perfectly pressed. "Where is the radar that spotted the fighters first?" one man asked. Everyone pointed to Thomas's machine. The engineers opened the side panel again. They saw the same strange copper wire, the same tightened coil, the same wrong-looking adjustments. One engineer frowned. "This isn't regulation. This is messy." Another shook his head. "Messy or not, this is the best radar on the coast." The officer asked, "Who changed this?" Thomas felt his stomach twist. He stepped forward slowly. I did, sir." The room grew quiet. The engineers stared at him. For a moment, Thomas thought he would be punished. But instead, the chief engineer said something he never expected. "Show us exactly what you did." Thomas blinked. "Sir, you want me to show you?" "Yes," the engineer said firmly. "Everything." So Thomas explained it all. How the coils shook at night, how the signal blurred during storms, how the grounding wire wiggled, how he used scrap copper to make the signal steadier. The engineers wrote notes as fast as they could. One of them said, "His adjustment spread the interference. It keeps the radar stable." Another added, "This wasn't in any manual." The chief engineer nodded. "It should be." Within a week, copies of Thomas's wiring pattern were quietly sent to other radar stations. There were no big announcements, no medals, no ceremonies. But radar operators in England, Scotland, and even stations on ships at sea started using his secret method. They didn't call it the Hale fix. They didn't even know who invented it. Instead, engineers gave it a fancy name, variable ground stability pattern. But everyone who used it saw the same thing: clearer screens, stronger signals, fewer failures, more warnings in time to save lives. Soon, almost every station along the coast used Thomas's idea, and German night fighters stopped having easy victories. Their surprise attacks failed again and again. Thomas never told anyone. He didn't look for credit. He didn't ask for praise. He just kept doing his job, quietly watching the radar, knowing that the fix nobody wanted, the fix everyone ignored, the fix that looked wrong, had become one of the most important tools in the night war. and he never said a word. Because some heroes speak with actions, not with voices. When the war finally ended, the radar station on the cliff grew quiet. The alarms stopped ringing, the sky stopped flashing with danger, and the sea, which once carried fear, now looked calm again. Thomas Hale packed his small bag. He took one last look at the radar room, the glowing screen, the dusty floor, the chair where he had sat through so many long nights. He touched the side of the machine gently, right where his secret copper wire was hidden inside. "Thank you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the machine or to the brave men it had saved. Then he walked out the door. There were no reporters waiting, no officers giving medals, no cheering crowds, just a simple handshake from his commander. "You did good work, Hale. Go home now." And that was it. Thomas went back to his small hometown. He worked once again in a tiny radio repair shop. He fixed old radios, clocks, and even toasters. People in town thought he was a quiet, polite young man who knew a lot about wires. No one knew he had helped save an entire convoy. No one knew he had changed how radar was used. No one knew that his wrong fix had protected hundreds of lives. He never bragged. He never told the story, not even to his closest friends. Years passed, then decades. Old radar sets were taken apart, replaced, or thrown away. Veterans grew old. New wars came and went. But in workshops and training schools, a strange little note stayed in old manuals. Use variable ground stability adjustments for better night signals. No one knew it came from Thomas. Radar engineers around the world followed the trick. Shipbuilders used it. Airfields used it. Even early weather stations copied the idea. They didn't know the name behind it. They only knew it worked. One day, long after the war, a group of students visited a small military museum. In one corner stood an old radar set from the coast. The metal was rusty. The screen was dusty. But inside the open side panel, one student pointed at a tiny piece of bent copper wire. "Why does this look so messy?" she asked. The museum volunteer smiled. "Sometimes," he said, "the best fixes don't look pretty." The kids laughed. Then one of them touched the wire softly. Somewhere far away, in his quiet home, Thomas Hale sat on his porch, watching the sunset. He didn't know that people were still learning from his work. He didn't know that his small act of bravery was living on in machines across the world. He didn't even know that a whole generation of radar operators had been taught a technique born from his courage. He just watched the sky grow darker, a sky he once protected, and maybe that was enough for him, because sometimes history forgets the names, but remembers the fingerprints. Sometimes the world never hears the hero's story, but lives because of it. One radar, one secret fix, one quiet man. Hundreds of lives saved. What surprised you more? That a wrong fix stopped a deadly attack, or that history almost forgot the man behind it? Tell us below.